Howdy guys, and welcome to a bit of a new video on the channel. That being one where I cover a what-if scenario that either I've thought up or someone suggested to me. And one that typically entails being a topic that could never really occur in canon or lore in any real form. But nevertheless, it is fun to explore and generally conjecture about. As such, for this first episode of this currently unnamed what-if series, which you'll probably see the title to in a few seconds, I'm going to be looking at the various races in the Elder Scrolls universe, the playable ones at least, and determine which one is potentially the most powerful, the details of which I'll explain in just a second. Now to start, this video is going to be a departure from the more scripted content that I've been doing as of late, and instead what I'm going to be focusing on is just getting the ideas out there, everything off the top of my head, and because of that, it's not going to be always as coherent as it could possibly be. And nevertheless, it's going to allow for me to conjecture more and just, in general, speak my mind. And because of that, like I always say, please don't crucify me. This is all just, it's kind of a theory, it's just me looking at things and trying to rationalize them the best I can. So that said, let's explain how I'm going to be doing this. So what I've done, at least what I'm going to do, is look at the races of the Elder Scrolls, the playable ones, like I just said, and determine which ones are the most powerful based off the epitome of that race. Like, for example, how one might consider Indril Nerevar the peak of the Dunmer. So, with that in mind, I'm going to be looking at characters like that, the peak of the races, but also I'm going to be, at least in the later half, delving into more coda aspects to determine what could potentially happen to these races that would make them even stronger, because let's be honest, at some point I'm just going to be comparing things that could honestly fight on an equal level. So I think it'd be best to go to a point in the lore, or the potential lore, where they become so powerful that they can't really even be fought against by each other. So with that said, I'll get right into the video. So I think to start this video, I should explain how I even came to the idea of making this video, because it kind of does play into how I'm going to go about this. That being that someone on the Imperial Knowledge Discord server asked what would happen if the races of Mer and the races of men fought, and who would be the winner. And what I did in this case was that I went about it, obviously I kind of give a half-baked answer, see what I did there, but what I did was I looked at the races and I just narrowed them down slowly. And from there I just decided that I was gonna show this person what I think the top 3 races were, but I never actually came to a conclusion. Actually I did though, but I said it was actually, I think I'll say that for later so I don't spoil you guys on what's next. Anyways, like I just said earlier, it's being measured off the peak of the races while also looking into the potential future lore of them. And I'll also just be talking about general things. As a note though, no factions can be attributed if they're more than just that race. So for example, the Psijics, or the Fighters Guild, or the Mages Guild, or just in general anything that is multiracial. So with that, the first thing I'll do is just list off the races. Those being the Dunmer, Altmer, Bosmer, Orsimer, Nords, Bretons, Imperials, Redguard, Khajiit, and Argonians. And with that, I think I should start by just discussing a little bit more about the races, their potential powers. And the first race, like I said, was the Dunmer. And the Dunmer, as some of you may know, are my favorite race. I absolutely adore everything about them. I love the lore. I love how strange it is. I love how it's a lot like based off of things like Vedic texts and lots of religious symbolatry in it, and it's fantastic. I love that kind of stuff. That said, the Dunmer are, in my opinion, really damn strong. That being that, they are capable of basically terraforming, at least in general, terraforming volcanic lands. Now, this is mostly the Talvani and stuff, but in general, they've done so much with what they were given, and seeing as they are actually just Chimer that became dark-skinned because of a curse, they've gone a long way in making themselves rise up in the world. Like, I know they have the guidance of the false gods, but aside from that, they've even with that, they've done so much with what they've been given. Like, I think I'll just start by talking about the major achievements. Those being, like, the fact that they were, like I just said, able to terraform all Vardenfell, Stonefalls, giant volcanic regions, tame the wildlife, but more so in their magical advances. That being that literally everyone, there's almost like a hard requirement in Morrowind for you to know the ability to levitate. And even their ancient, like, tombs have, like, requirements for levitation so you can get to certain places. And so, for me, what that shows is that they're a very culturally advanced society. And not just, like, culturally, but, like, scientifically, as far as we understand science to be, in terms of magic in Elder Scrolls. So, with that, they're already at a higher level than a lot of the other races when it comes to just understanding magic. But with that said, I want to focus very much so on one of the great houses, which is the Telvanni, and a little bit of House Indero, which I'll get to towards the end. But when it comes to House Telvanni, they are absolutely insane, and I mean that in probably the nicest way possible. Because House Telvanni not only can grow giant mushrooms, but in the case of their more superior mages, like Devaith Fear, are able to travel multiple planes of oblivion. And another one would be the guy from Solstheim, I forgot his name. But the ability to travel multiple planes of oblivion, the ability to attempt to recreate the Heart of Lorkhan, and just in general, the fact that they can understand dwarven architecture and tonal magic so easily and harness it to some extent. With, I think, the best example of this being in the Dragonborn DLC, where, at least in my opinion, the Heartstones are an imitation by Neloth, that was his name, to mimic the Heart of Lorkhan by inserting it into someone else and trying to channel that same sort of power by harvesting power from the Red Mountain. And so the fact that they're able to make these connections, and not just that, but the fact that so many of them understand super high-level metaphysics is really amazing. And we've seen the things that Devaith Fear can do, like curing Corpus, though the effects haven't always been predictable. They're really amazing, and when it comes down to everything the Dunmer have done, it's almost innumerable. And I'm not even talking about the False Gods or Indral Nerevar, who are their heroes. I'm just talking about in general, like, the society and the culture and how they've conquered everything and how they've managed to ascend beyond what they could potentially do as a disgraced race. With that said, before I really get into the deep stuff, because I want to get on to that later, I'm just going to start talking about every other race. That being the Altmer. The Altmer are pretty goddamn amazing. I'm not going to talk about them that much, for a little more reasons in a second. But in general, the Altmer are basically, if you consider the Dunmer the New World, the Altmer are the Old World. And as such, a lot of their ideas are like that. And I think right about now, I know they're extremely powerful and they have the Psijic Order and stuff and all that around them. But the Psijic Order, like I said, is not just a single race. Yes, it was founded by, or at least it started in the Somerset Isles and was started by Chimer, or at this point, Altmer maybe? Actually, I don't know the exact history of that. But now it's basically run by Altmer. But it has a lot of different races in it. And so I'm not going to include that. But that said, their magics are very powerful. However, there's a very, very big issue with the magic and just general power of the Altmer, is that it's extremely time consuming. Dunmer, on the other hand, if you've ever seen any of the games, like especially ESO, Dunmer can cast magic on the fly. While Altmer, literally actually, with Levitate, while Altmer are very much bound to rituals. In fact, so much of the plot of the main quest of ESO Somerset revolves around rituals, and lots of time taking place in between the different spells that they cast. So, in the case of Altmer, I can almost kick them out of this battle immediately because they're just not quick thinkers. They may be extremely powerful, but if we're going to judge them based on what other races can do in shorter amounts of time versus what they can do in that same amount of time, there's just no match. I know, and actually on that, one of the major advantages Altmer have over other races is the fact that they live so long, so they have time for this. And that's just the issue, time. And I hate to say it, but like I said, I'm gonna have to kick them out of this race. Ha ha ha. And with that, I'll move on to the Bosmer. Now, the Bosmer are very unique, and they will actually, I'll just spoil it up front, they're gonna move on to the next round. Now, the reason for this is that because the Bosmer are so entwined with the forest or the green, which is the creation of a god known as Ifre. Not exactly sure on what god he is in the other pantheons, but he's generally referred to as Ifre in pretty much every pantheon. But what he's allowed for the Bosmer to do is basically master tonal architecture. But that's also kind of not true. See, with the Bosmer, they have this kind of rule that this kind of power they were given by Ifre, in that they can sing to the green, which is all just the creation of Ifre, and the green will follow their orders. Now, singing, unlike with mushrooms, with Dunmer, which are grown actually, the mushrooms are grown, they can just sing what they want. Now they have very specialized people for singing to the trees in the green. Obviously, they've kept it to a very bare minimum, but we're told by the Augur of the Obscure that they can literally, that they're very much not using their powers to its fullest extent. Who's to say that the Bosmer couldn't sing into existence Numidium 2.0, or literally the strongest thing in creation that they could think of? But obviously, it'd be made out of the green, so it lacks some power. But what that means is that Ifre somehow managed to grant them the knowledge of what I think to be tonal magics. Now, for those of you who don't know, tonal magic and architecture, or however you refer to it as, it's tonal magic, is when you see a little bit more before I get too deep into this, a little bit more backstory on this. The entire Elder Scrolls universe is kind of like a song. And tonal magics is when you manipulate that song. Now, there's a lot of different tonal magics. I'll get to some more later on. And basically, it's the ability to bend the known world around you to your own will based off messing with that sound of the universe. Now, getting back to the Bosmer case, I think there's limitations on it because it was granted to them by Ifre and only concerning the green. But nevertheless, it's an extremely powerful thing. And even if they don't manage to follow Ifre's laws, like not eating plants, weird as all hell, I don't really get it. I get not everything's the green technically, but they can't eat plants even outside for some reason. I mean outside of the general area of Valenwood. But what happens when they don't obey him is that they ultimately end up just being cursed, and they become feral, or as it's called, the Wild Hunt is invoked. Now, what we originally thought this was that, they transform into crazy wild monsters, but ESO kind of let me down on that. They just become either vampiric looking, they become werewolves, but I think that just might be a limitation of the engine and assets and time. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say the Bosmer can become these crazily horrid monsters when they disobey the Green Pact, which is actually the name of the deal that they made with Ifre to get the ability to sing. And that adds another whole layer to their power, which I think to some extent might even be possible to use to their own advantage. And for that reason, along with what I just said way before that about the singing and potential tonal magics, I'm going to pass them on to the next round with the Dunmer. But then I'm going to have to kind of let you guys down and talk about the race, one of the few races I actually don't like that much, despite a lot of the work that's been done on them recently, the Orsimer. Now, the Orsimer are, for lack of a better term, they're not that interesting. Now, they do have a very cool-looking architecture, designs, etc., but when it comes to powers, we've never really seen anything super cool about them except for the fact that they're horridly physically strong. Like, they can withstand pretty much anything, but outside of being physically strong, there's nothing for, like, going for them. Like, Dunmer, they have their incredibly powerful magics. And the Bosmer have both their singing and their like extreme amounts of athleticism, which is why they're actually taken as Night Blitz a lot, or stealth assassins. But orcs in general are just, there's not much you can say they have going for them except for their obscenely large amounts of strength. And I could delve further into their lore, but I really don't see right off the bat, just off the top of my head, what makes them so much stronger than any other race, unless there is something I'm missing, in which case, correct me all you want, please. So with that, I think we'll move on to another very large candidate in my book, the Nords. Now, the Nords they're an enigma. I'll just say that right off the bat. Delving a little bit into stuff that may not be canon anymore, because there's a lot of rewriting after Daggerfall. But they are potentially the strongest race of men to exist. And for fair reason, because from the legends we're told about them, Nords used to have lifespans comparable to the Altmer, and the ability to use the Thuum, which, as we've seen in Skyrim, is really goddamn strong. And not just that, but it's also a tonal magic. And they were able to use it so frequently that at some point, the gods had to come together, or at least Orki came to Alduin to kind of shut them down. Now, obviously, I've gone over this a bit, but they were saved, but at the cost of losing their massive Mer-like lifespans. But that didn't lose them their ability to shout frequently and bend the universe around them to their will, though over time it seems that that ability was lost. And as I've been told by some people, and as we've kind of seen in the game, while I was on the Imperial Knowledge Discord server discussing this race war thing, the people mentioned how, or at least someone mentioned how, there's the fact that they can, it's not just specifically limited to the Nords, which I think might be a mistake, because the games don't always apply to the lore, in that the Ebony Warrior could shout, but he was not a Nord. Which really confuses me, because we haven't seen that before, and every other time we've heard that, it was always a technicality. Or there was, the person was they were a Dragonborn, or something like that. So, I feel that might not be applicable, but it might. But nevertheless, Nords have a higher inclination to learn. And given enough time, each and every Nord could shout very effectively and very well, as we see with the Greybeards in Skyrim. Outside of that, they're very physically strong, they're hardy people, and are almost comparable to the orcs when it comes to their physical strength, though not as freakishly strong. There's also many other tales about the Nords, and I will get to their hero in a second, once I finish covering the races in general and canceling some out. So with that, the Nords are actually going to go up a level, so there's now the Dunmer, the Bosmer, and the Nords, who have surpassed this kind of culling, while the Altmer and Orsimer are out. And next we have the Bretons and Imperials. Now, I'm just going to group these two together because they're a lot alike, in that the Bretons, while being half-breeds of, who obviously have been kind of, their bloodlines have kind of been, how you say, diluted over time, they are still half Mer, half man. I think with the Needs and the Ailids. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the only real inclinations they have are with magic towards the Mer side, but they also suffer from all the same issues that men would have with lifespan and comprehending certain things, and the fact that their society has taken a lot on the societies of the Imperials. So right off the bat, I'm not even going to talk about them. Bretons are out. They just took too many bad parts from the man side of their lineage than they should have, without learning all the cool parts, or the important parts, which actually they might have, but I don't think we've explored that enough. And also, they don't have any tonal magics, so out of the books for me. And then we have the Imperials, and the Imperials are very much just that. They're boring vanilla race that no one really likes. They don't really have anything. The Amulet of Kings is about their only real power. In fact, there's no tonal magics involved with the actual hero in Oblivion itself. He just ends up mantling Daedric Prince, so that's that. I'm gonna immediately kick them out as well. There's nothing important about them. And then we'll move on to the last race of men, the Redguard. And the Redguard are similar to the Nords in that they have the power to use tonal magics. Now, this comes in the form of sword singing. Now, we don't know the actual extent to sword singing, but from what we've heard and what we've kind of seen, is that it's incredibly, incredibly powerful in the right hands. Now, in ESO, I'll give a little example about that. The last master of sword singing kind of dies, and it's left to Sai-Sahan, who doesn't really know it that well. But from what we've seen, that master was able to hold off a basic Daedric invasion, a mini Daedric invasion, all by herself, only to be killed off in the last second because she was pretty much the only one left. But to me, that shows a lot, because sword singing could have so much potential to it. And since the tonal magic, it doesn't just have to be like a bound blade. It could be like a weapon that could shape time and space just by being swung. Like, oh, you swing it, it ends up like decapitating every single enemy in the entire army that you're fighting against because you willed the blade to extend to the size of an entire army. Anyways, that's just a possibility and conjecture I'm throwing at it. But we don't really know its power, but nevertheless, I'm going to pass it on because it is a tonal magic. And with that, we've kind of covered every race of man and a little bit of the Altmer or Mer directly. So with that, I'm going to move on to the beast races. And one of them I feel is extremely powerful, while the other I feel is even though we've seen a lot about them. And that being the Khajiit. Now, the Khajiit, just by themselves, nothing really special. They are, of course, their origin is layered in mysteries. Whatever you talk about them, someone out there is probably going to tell you you're wrong about their origin. But nevertheless, the Khajiit are heavily bound to Azura and the moon. Kind of like how the Dunmer are. Except the Dunmer take on moon and star, while the Khajiit take on the lunar lattice and the twin moons. Anyways, from what we've seen, the Khajiit, while actually very powerful, like in the plot of ESO Somerset, where one of the characters, I won't spoil it too much, but is able to move the moons and essentially access other planes of existence simply by using the lattice as a portal, or using it as a way to like beam yourself across different planes of existence within the Elder Scrolls. Now that by itself is pretty damn powerful, but that is considering that it's literally their strongest heroes doing this. Outside of that, they obviously have a lot of different benefits, like how they are bound to the moons and how the main and how the queens and kings can all change. But that said, they don't really have anything that's tonal magic levels. I understand the moons are powerful and they're linked to Lorcan, so moving them could have a lot of implications, but I just don't think there's enough information here to really throw them to the next level. So it's going to be a no for me, dog. And then we have the Argonians. Now, Argonians they're a can of worms. But in general, I don't think it's the Argonians themselves, but their masters, the Hiss, that are the real threat here. And since the Argonians and the Hiss are basically tied together at the hip, or bound together at the hip by the hip, I think that everything involving the Hiss, that being that they're an interdimensional, interchronological, multi-existential race or being, probably like a Daedra maybe, I don't know the exact or specifics about it, that they, just by their sheer existence and being bound to the lizards that they made into the Argonians, they're going to get a pass. I'll explain later on this in a bit. But I think that Argonians really deserve to head up in this battle. So with that said, we now have the Dunmer, the Bosmer, the Nords, and the Argonians, as well as the Redguards. rising up. And from here, I'm just going to start doing the culling again. And I won't actually talk about the strengths of the races that'll pass on. I'll just talk about why I'm dropping out the races I am. And those races are going to be the Bosmer and the Redguard. Now, similar to the Khajiit, the Redguard simply don't have enough information on them. And I really don't want to go ahead with something I don't know enough about and just say they're stronger than every other race simply because they can use a form of tonal magic. So, in the case of the Redguard, while they could have so many grand implications to their power, I'm going to have to drop them down and just cut them out of this race. And then with the Bosmer. Now, the Bosmer's real failing factor in their power comes to how they're limited to the green. And the green is very much a sedentary thing. It's all in Valenwood. And you have to basically bring the green with you, like seeds from Valenwood, to be able to use the power of the green. And to me, that feels like a very big limiting factor when determining power. And not just that, we don't really have any major heroes from the Bosmer who could potentially fight against the great heroes of the other races. Discluding the Argonians, of course. Like I said, that's a can of worms. But for that reason, I'm also going to have to drop the Bosmer altogether. That said, we do, in fact, have 3 races left. And surprise, surprise, it's the Dunmer, the Nords, and the Argonians. And I'll be real with you guys for a second. It's going to be very hard to whittle this down any further. And this is actually where I kind of stopped on explaining this on the Imperial Knowledge Discord server. Because I was having a very hard time just going forward trying to dissect this any further. But I think since I do talk a lot about theory and general conjecture and coda on this channel, it'll be safe for me to kind of bring that in here as a potential ending point for these races. So, with that said, let's talk about the Dunmer. The Dunmer, like I said, they have all these crazy things about the Telvanni. But looking into coda and landfall, where landfall being the story, I might link this actually, but the story about how Numidium, this giant brass golem with the heart of Lorcan in it, or I think there's another heart thing. The heart of Lorcan was actually in another golem at the time. But basically it was able to destroy all of Nirn, forcing the races to flee. But the race that kind of pioneered this escape was the Dunmer, and how they did this was that they very much so used the power of their Telvanni mages. And on top of that, they kind of harnessed tonal magic that was left behind by the Dwemer. Now, the Dwemer, as we know, just kind of disappeared off the face of Nirn after tapping on the heart a few times with Keening and Sunder. But the Dunmer and Coda, at least, were able to harness this power. And as becomes apparent as time goes forward onto things like Kinmune, which is another non-canon work, which technically still fits in canon because the works still do belong to Bethesda in their unfinished forms, kind of shows how far they were able to take it, where they were able to basically take tonal magic or tonal architecture, which was what the Dwemer used, and morph it to something that they could use to pilot ships that they could use, and ships not just, I don't mean like ships on Nirn, but ships through space, which is a wild concept, but I won't get into that. But they were able to harvest this magic to a point where they could travel through time, where they could pretty much do anything and everything that would qualify them as like a level 1 civilization if we were ever to talk about it here, or like a level 0, I don't know what that might be. But it's just a civilization that is so far advanced that they don't really need to depend on anything because they're so large and so advanced. But that was all because they were able to use the fact that they had slightly longer lifespans, which in itself is a very big advantage, but also on top of that, they were able to kind of harvest it in a way that they could use immediately. And to me, that's just frankly astounding, because no other race except for maybe the Nords were able to do that, and as we'll find out, so did the Argonians. But that's way later on. And then looking at their most powerful hero, Indril Nerevar, this guy was able to, like, supposedly, reincarnate, not only fight off people using literal godhead levels of power, then win, but at the same time unite the entirety of a nation and then run away to another continent to do whatever he wants to. And then, in the case of Coda, return to fight and for a while win against Numidium in the giant golem that we see in Morrowind. I forgot the exact name though. And kind of with the heart of Lorcan, and he pilots it, and it's a giant mech battle. It sounds way cooler than I'm actually making it out to be. But the peak of their race was able to go toe-to-toe with the peak of the Nordic races. And his battle was partially the reason why he died. In that so much energy and force was exerted fighting someone using high-level world-bending tonal magics. And you are just a very powerful Dunmer using both magical and physical enhancements to try and take him down. So the fact that Indra Lerivar was able to go toe-to-toe with Ismir Wolfarth is frankly amazing. And it shows that even without using tonal magics, that they were able to do so much and still win, which I can't say about other races. But that said, Coda is also very much centered around the Dunmer, so obviously they're going to win. But that said, I think we should move on to the Nords. And when it comes to the Nords, they are beyond amazing when it comes to messing with tonal magic, in that their former greatest hero, and then eventually Talos Stormcrown, Ismir Wolfarth, was able to bend time, bend reality, make people age in reverse, make himself fly, basically meet other gods, and all because he had such a great mastery over the Thu'um. And this is really just the cornerstone of the power of the Nords, in that anything that they are able to do, the best of it is really just the fact that they are so goddamn good at manipulating the Thu'um. And since the Thu'um is in fact a tonal magic, mastery over it, because honestly this will all come down to a battle between tonal magic, so I'll tell you right off the bat that they were able to do crazy things. Like, we've seen a little bit of tonal magics in Skyrim with the last Dragonborn, who I would consider the pinnacle of the Nords, because he just started and he's already able to do these crazy powerful things, like bending time, forcing dragons to break to his will, kind of like Alduin, except Alduin did it more so through birthright. But just the fact that they have such a mastery over tonal magic is amazing. And I don't think any more needs to be said, because we've seen the effects of it. Like Cyrodiil being completely transformed by Talos, who was in fact a basic master of, or at least his legend makes it out to be, because Tiber Septim himself was just a man who probably could shout and was perhaps a real Dragonborn. But I don't want to get into that right now. But the god Talos was crazy. Everything that you can imagine he could do with tonal magic, he could probably do. And he did. And it's shown in the fact that Cyrodiil, like I said, is no longer a jungle. And that he transformed it by himself, which is really just a cover up for the fact that they kind of messed up, and they had to cover it up, and that, oh, we forgot, we wanted to make it this a typical fantasy, but oh, we had to make it a jungle, so let's just make him override it. But when it comes down to it, the Nords' power is all based on the Thu'um. And then lastly, we have the Argonians. And the Argonians are something else. Because despite everything I've said, the Argonians are something I still don't fully understand. But we've seen the kind of power that they have. And that being that, like I said, they're a inter-chronological, spatial, whatever you want to call it, race. Or rather, the Hist are. And the fact that the Hist can do so much just automatically qualifies them as an immediate issue here. And based off what we've seen of them in Murkmire, there's so much more about them, and it's honestly kind of scary because they can morph the Argonians to look however they want them to look like. In the case of the behemoths, which are not even Argonians, they're just created by the Hist right off the spot, and are a million times stronger than a normal Argonian. And the fact that they can morph this race and do what they want, as we kind of see later on in Kinmune, with how, well, at least we don't really see it, but it's very much implied that because of the fact that the Hists are so strong, they're able to advance to such a far era. The 9th era is actually when Kinmune takes place, which it has a lot to do, it has a lot of crazy stuff in it that's not very much fantasy, or at least medieval fantasy, which is or the kind that Skyrim is, which is Nordic fantasy, or whatever it's called. I don't really know, but they've really been able to harness the fact that they, or it, whatever the Hist is, and hence the Argonians are this tool, and so much has come of it, and I honestly have a hard time putting into words how crazy powerful that the Hists really are. And with that, I think because of, now that we're down to these last 3, I think it's about time that we kick out the Nords and the Argonians. Now, the Argonians they're very powerful, and I would very much keep them in this race and probably make them win, had it not been for the fact that I don't know enough about the Hist. And for all we know, the Hist could just be putting on a farce, or they could really be that strong. Or there's always the option that the Hist are just planning ahead, and that their power isn't able to keep up with that of the other races, or in this case, the Dunmer. And based off Coda in general, it comes down to basically the Argonians and the Dunmer, or at least the Hist and the Dunmer. Which actually kind of goes to the reason why I disregarded the Nords, in that they're kind of wiped out during landfall, and that's because towards the end of this whole thing, the Nords are pretty goddamn weak. Even with their greatest hero, who's probably going to be the Dragonborn, the rest of them really don't match up. And your typical Nord is not your typical Bosmer, or your typical Altmer, or any of the races. Though they might be the strongest of the races of men, the Nords really, really, really could have advanced more. Which the Nords really just lack that oomph factor that kind of elevates the Argonians and Dunmer to another level. And I know that you could say the same about the Dunmer and how so many of them are just mundane, but at the same time, they also, at least in Coda, and to some extent in what we've seen in games like ESO, have managed to do so much more with their time on this on Nirn than any other race. Same goes for the Argonians. But like I said with the Argonians, I just feel like I would need more information on the Nords to classify them as the strongest race. So with that, I think finally we come down to this entire thing, and I think the Dunmer are the strongest race. And yes, there are great amounts of bias in this, but based on how the Dunmer are able to adapt so quickly, and how I firmly believe at least that had the Telvanni actually cared about Red Mountain, they could have stopped it from erupting. And they could have honestly have taken on the false gods at full power. Because there's just so much about the Telvanni that is on another level. Which like I said, with the Argonians, I can't put into words that easily. But with that, I think my speechlessness should help lend a little bit to my point. And if you disagree, please explain why, because this is just the conclusion I came to, and in my opinion, is what I think the strongest race is. So with that, please tell me if I've done anything wrong. If I've misinterpreted, if I've gone about missing information that was out in the open, because this is all off the top of my head. And obviously, as I said, I've introduced bias, so please, correct me all you want. But I think the Dunmer are the strongest, and I think that, unless you're talking about the Argonians, in which case it might be easy to convince me. But with that, I think it'd be a good point to end this video, because I've kind of made it to the end of my point. And I think that whatever you may think about the Elder Scrolls, that you can't deny that this is one hell of a interesting world. And I know I say this a lot, but I think that by making this almost ranty, and off the top of my head, I'm able to express that, in my opinion at least, things like Coda really add to this world. Because there's just so much more influence from different real-life cultures in Coda that the base Elder Scrolls lore, which actually has been attempting to include Coda, recently at least, is missing. And as with my typical theory videos, I'll end this off by saying I feel that that's a very big shame. But nevertheless, it is what it is. And with that, thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like, maybe subscribe. If you have any questions, I'll be in the comments like usual. Anyways, thanks for watching. As always, it's all just a dream, something like that. I always throw a vague reference to Coda in the end of all these theory videos, or in the end of whatever this what if series is going to be. I'll throw a vague reference in. And thanks for watching, just like I said. And see you later. Kuyo out.